Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to another live stream of video game news. Today is Wednesday, August 28th. I almost said Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel there, but we're not branding it as that anymore. I'm pretty much setting myself up for a false start almost certainly, but the hope here is that I can actually go through these new shorter streams that without having to take a bathroom break in the middle of them. Once again, this medium emergency that I'm in is just led to just a better improvement on what these live streams are, in my opinion, but also shorter live streams, which the whole point of live streams at one point when they were valuable. Let's see. Was back in the day, the whole point of the live streams was to go as long as possible and compete like Twitch, and just go on forever. So we're gonna have to cheer a champion here in this event, so let's just pick somebody. Let's go Team 7. I recognize that name. That may not mean anything, but yeah, and there's a whole bunch of information here. So how do you actually cheer? You come over here. Okay. There we go. The World Championships, I mean, they're doing a decent job, certainly, but there's definitely not a lot of reason or special reason here to do this. And I have 19 days left to get to at least level 50, and that would require actually playing Yu-Gi-Oh!, which is just not happening. You really don't get a whole of your gems back until you get to at least level 99 if you were going to buy the gold version, so yeah. I guess we'll leave it at that. And what do we have? Here we have a bundle, which we can afford. Which this is just going to be a bunch of master packs, which is going to also give me some extra rewards. And you can only do that once. And then there is yet another bundle. Same thing. One thing I guess I am proving by not playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Is that there isn't any increased incentivization to come back to the game. They really do just let you drop the ball and not come back at all. Like, it would make a lot of sense if they had some kind of flash sales for individuals who haven't really played a game in a few days. It's probably been weeks. Let's see, you have like a updated version of this, which maybe makes an argument to make several purchases of this, but not really. You could do that, but then I'd just be short on gems, and now this is effectively the last bit of my gems I'll ever have, unless I can find some way in my schedule, which is getting smaller and smaller, to justify going back to playing Yu-Gi-Oh! At large numbers, and I just don't see that. So yeah, my problem otherwise has always been that I'm not anywhere as effective or efficient as I'd like to be. I get very little done on a day-to-day basis. It doesn't feel like a solid 8 hours of productivity by any means. It feels like at best I'm getting 2 or 3 hours in an 8 to 12 hour time period. Now, admittedly, I haven't worked a lot of jobs where you just sit around in an office and do nothing for 8 hours, and you really are only doing about 20 minutes worth of work in a day. So my perspective is almost certainly skewed on that. But yeah, for my own personal desires, being my own boss, I don't feel like I accomplish too much, and I get distracted and I get tired very quickly. Which, yeah, there's people like that. There are diseases like fibromyalgia that cause that, and then there's just people that are tired. I think it's kind of crazy to assume that every single human being on the planet would have the same level of energy levels, metabolism, things like that. So yeah, as a long twisty way of saying I don't feel like I really accomplished much between the last stream. Here we can see Deadlock is working its way up towards the top 10 of concurrent players, although 24-hour peak of 92,000 gets really tough to double that to something like Naraka Blade Point, which I don't even understand why Naraka Blade Point here is in the order this is in, because Naraka Blade Point apparently had 237,000 players, and yet Apex Legends seems to have had less than that, and GTA seems to have less than that. So I'd have to assume that this is a typo, and if it's a typo, that's crazy, because almost certainly you would have thought these numbers were being inputted procedurally, not by somebody actually typing it in. Almost certainly this is supposed to be 137,000 though. That's the only thing that makes sense, but even that doesn't make sense on this list. I think perhaps what would be due is to turn off the uBlock origin and see how this is sorted. Yes, okay. That's the problem. I need to make sure this is open in such a way that it's always sorting by 24-hour peak. Because that would drastically change the whole appearance. It still does point out though that the 24-hour peak is very hard to get into those top 5 spots, and fairly hard to even get into the top 10 spots. And very quickly you start to scroll down and see that the numbers just get smaller and smaller. There is no major game right now, and I haven't seen since starting to really follow these SteamDB charts any major game that just everybody is playing. And in fairness, I seriously doubt Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel is considered a flop just because only 22,000 players played it in the last 24 hours. That number is probably still extremely high. There was one game I wanted to point out here. Binding of Isaac still going very strong. I saw on Reddit that Mugenics, the next game from the creator of Binding of Isaac, or at least one of them, is about to finally be released. It is going to be much more of a cat-friendly game, and not, I think, anything like Binding of Isaac, which has a decent chance of meaning that it won't sell any better than any of Edmund McMillan's other games that he's tried to make and release. Something very much resonated with Binding of Isaac that just hasn't resonated with his other games. Super Meat Boy being the other game from the other creator, I think, of Binding of Isaac. I might be getting all of this wrong. And so there was two creators really working together to make Binding of Isaac a success, and now there's a whole team behind it, Binding of Isaac Rebirth, maintaining it and making it continued success. And that is, I guess, the one argument for corporations if you can't put things in the public domain and just let fan groups maintain or make mods or expand on games. The one argument would be to have your artists, creative directors move on to other projects, which they often want to move on to other projects, while still having less creative people or people who have just never been, are gonna never be given an opportunity to be creative, maintain and continue a game. And we would definitely see more of that with the Stop Killing Games movement if that actually succeeded. And we just saw games effectively legally being required to be left in playable states and maintained. Microsoft, I saw a news story that Microsoft has donated Mono to the Wine Linux. Wine is not an emulator. Now, that sounds like a huge thing because Mono is the Linux rebuild of the .NET framework, and even now there's a decent amount of programs that are still being made with .NET. That being said, the Mono that Microsoft has donated and really just abandoned for somebody else to control is basically the first version of Mono that really shouldn't be used now. Microsoft is still maintaining their own closed source version of Mono, and inherently the .NET framework is less and less something that you would want to use as game developers. Less and less want to make a game that would be more difficult to port to the Nintendo Switch and the PlayStation, alongside being more difficult to port to a Linux operating system. There definitely was a time where .NET was very performant, very efficient in how things were executed, but I'm not sure it's really needed, and it is very much just a kind of closed source programming language when ideally you would have everybody just using C# without any .NET extensions or Rust, or a lot of times it is just like Java still. So yeah, that story probably won't get a lot of coverage just for the fact that it's too technical. Anyways. So the one thing I didn't do was change the colors or mess with this chart. But in contrast to that, I have, I think, succeeded in changing all the major news sources now to be more of a theme like Steam. Although inherently, there's still a lot of room for tweaking, because I kind of don't like the 4 or 5 different colors that are used for a 5-color palette layout of Steam. I'll show you Steam in a second to point this out. Yeah, right now this chart still is kind of useless, but we are hitting a point now where there's been 6 days that have been sampled, and with that there is a more of an averaging happening as far as games that people are actually interested in and that are more relevant, whereas we're seeing more and more of a gradual drop off of games that day to day being sampled, or sample to sample, really, shouldn't say day to day. There's just not that many people playing them. And I could see right here being a good point to cut it off. You could also see being right here being a good point. And the more samples we get, the more it will start to show itself as far as which games are worth mentioning. And there is still very much an argument to just blacklist the top 10 games if it's just the same top 10 games. Maybe even just remove the top 10 from the chart, but still mention them might even make some sense. Noticeably, this game, Euro Truck Simulator, has had success in the past, but had very few players today. And same is true for Farming Simulator. The same is true for Stallcraft. Which that might mention some trend, a pointer trend. Notice here though on the chart we're starting to see also a pattern here where these games at this point are fairly consistent sample to sample. There's not a big change happening, but then you start to see some where entire days it's not in the top 100 list. So I do feel like I'm at a higher potential now with this new bar graph, stacked bar graph chart, to actually see things that are see bits of information and be able to estimate or extrapolate some opinion based on that information, a theory at least, whereas the line charts was not. The timeline chart was not really showing me much of anything except for an overall trend that new games tend to slowly lose their number of players as they get older, and overall, until there's a brand new game that catches everyone's attention, most games tend to lose the number of players. So I was talking about earlier the different color palettes. So on Steam, you have the blue gradient, first of all, which adds, technically, lots and lots of different colors. But let's ignore that, because that would be too complicated to even deal with. But Steam, in general, has a dark blue, a light blue, a white text, a gray background here for top sellers, and we're ignoring all the color palettes on the screenshots and thumbnails. That's not Steam. But then they have an even lighter blue. Then they have green, dark green background, light green. So you're already up to like 5 different colors on their palette. And inherently, I would have to assume what happened here is there was many different employees who have touched the Steam's artistic theme and added their own little tweaks and touches. There probably was some paperwork they could point to say that green screams sales and gets them more sales. So somebody probably made the argument to add green at some point. It might be interesting to see just the general evolution of Steam over the years. Most recently, they are trying to get multicolorful, as with red, blue, yellow, and green. Then throwing even more colors with an aqua and a purple and an orange and another red. And yeah. So there's at least 8 colors that they're trying to throw in here. And at that level, that kind of would work, but I have no idea how you'd apply those 8 colors to this whole page. And there's definitely, in these newer boxes, these new category boxes, less of a focus that these boxes are really supposed to fade into the background as much as these are supposed to fade into the background. Notice how when you hover over these boxes, nothing happens. When you hover over this one, it zooms in and pops out, very much indicating that these are tiles on top of a blue table. And then Steam Deck has its red and black theme for OLED, and then a blue and red and white with black text theme. And then the non-OLED theme has been pretty much forgotten about, at least as far as the front page is concerned. Yeah, it's kind of weird that this has like on wishlist here when you could have squeezed just a little on your wishlist icon down here, and then there's just a whole menu box that pops up, which is not something I think most people would remember exists, as far as if you want to add it to your wish list or ignore it. It would make a lot more sense to have 3 buttons here for wish list, ignore, and store preferences, and it would just be a gear, a circle with an X with a slash through it, and a wish list as far as just a piece of paper. That would be grayed out if it's enabled, and you just click on it to enable it. Or at the very least, you'd put the 3 dots going with the Android theming down here where it was always visible. So inherently I'm trying to copy the theme, the color layout of Steam, but I also have a real problem with the way Steam looks right now. But I'm not gonna go through the massive effort of redoing the CSS on Steam, because that's going to take way too much work for very little reward. I do suspect at some point, and I've said this before and still have seen no real evidence to prove me right, but I do suspect at some point, maybe years down the line, we will see Steam relaunch with a whole new, more modern layout. It may not ever really be a relaunch, though. It may also just be slow twists and changes. And inherently, Steam is stuck between a bit of a rock and a hard place, in that they need to get any change they make that would require game developers to change their screenshots or anything like that. They need to get and force people to be on board with changing their arts package per game, which means getting thousands of publishers to actually bother to do that, which they won't really want to do. Interesting to have an isometric game sale. Yeah, you tend not to see game sales that are just built around the way the camera is oriented. You don't tend to. I don't think I've ever seen a first-person shooter or first-person perspective sale or a third-person perspective sale. But isometric games do have such a abnormal feel to them that they effectively feel like a genre on their own, which really highlights how much visually a game can be categorized. Yeah, I still feel like at some point we probably will see something closer to this as far as what the Steam storefront is going to look like, particularly as more and more people will be browsing Steam on potentially HDR screen monitors or OLED screens, or cell phones with OLED screens. I didn't change any of these interstitials for the new theme. And I will probably do that at some point, but not yet. And I may just get rid of the interstitials. But I did change Video Games Chronicle. Perhaps not to 100% success, though, as it seems. I may need to just straight up drag some of the tabs around. So here, well, here we can see that this width is too wide and the height is too high, so little tweaks need to happen, and perhaps there's a white line here that also could be removed. What I've done is eliminate as much distraction as possible. So there are links here, but they don't have any different color and they don't have an underline under them, which is going to make it very difficult to know that Tokyo Game Show 2024 is a link until you hover over it. That being said, for Video Games Chronicle and most of the news sites, in fact, I'd say GameDeveloper.com is also kind of bad about it. Gematsu's a little bit better. I just generally like Gematsu a little bit more than my other news sources anyways. But yeah, most of these pages are just full of links that go somewhere else. That is very possibly just because of old school search engine optimization tricks, more than actual thought that any actual human would click on all of those links. But no, I'm trying to make this look like an article, so it is just pure text everywhere. Of course, I'm now saying here we have a Twitter post that is way far to the left, and there's this VGC right in the lower corner, which I could go out of my way to try and get rid of it, but there's really no reason. So, two major problems on this one page that need to be addressed as far as tweaking, but compare that to what it was, or something closer to what it was before for Video Games Chronicle, which would be this. Which, yeah, that's considerably less readable as far as fonts and size. The stretch on what I'm showing is totally wrong. Remember, with the ad blocker off, there would be a lot more to this page. There'd be a whole sidebar of ads and more things to complain about. One of the things I've found consistently that needed to be adjusted is the line weight. And the weird thing here is almost certainly Video Games Chronicle and GameDeveloper.com and very possibly Gematsu all use extremely similar WordPress plugins or the same software. So you start to see things that aren't standard HTML as far as style classes being used over and over again, whereas Twitter, on the other hand, has just like a completely different style in which it's designed, and it's much more complicated as far as a style and less easy to manipulate as such. The actual story here is that Rydo Gotoku Studio is hosting a presentation next month. This is like a Dragon developer, so this is effectively just an announcement for an announcement. Font weight, by the way, is just how heavy a font looks, in the sense that how much white space will be in between each of the lines. It's kind of like bolding with more metrics than just on and off, like you would see bold in other cases. A remaster of Croc Legends of the Goobies is coming this year. There's two. So whatever page I was working on was not a good sample page, because this headline too is stretched out too much. The video is stretched out exactly where I want it to be stretched out, and I've had to reinstall a plugin that I didn't know whether I was going to need it or not after I reinstalled the Firefox from scratch and just started over several weeks ago, to just stop the pop-up of ad suggestions at the end of these videos, which that does bring about an interesting question, certainly as far as whether or not I should let these videos play at the regular speed when I could potentially have them play at like 1.5 speed. Overall, I think it would probably save a lot of time to play at 1.5 speed and wouldn't change too much, but on the other end, I don't know. So yeah, without the plugin, there would be a bunch of other videos being suggested here, which is just less professional looking. Ideally, I'd like to be able to turn off all the interface, but there really is no way to do that. So if I was to just like do that and do 1.5 speed, let's see, make sure we are at 1.5 speed, showing the trailer at that faster speed is just going to make the game itself look like it's running too fast. So almost, if you were going to do that, demands that there would be something to remind people that the video is sped up. And I don't watch enough trailers for it to really justify speeding it up anyways, so I probably won't do that. Crash Bandicoot is going to camo in the Astrobot game, despite Microsoft's Activision acquisition. I guess Activision owns Crash Bandicoot. I don't think Microsoft really cares, frankly, but also this may have already been negotiated. Another tweak I did is I added more of a margin on the right than the left so that text doesn't go all the way to the edge. But you will also notice that, like, Video Games Chronicle may have slightly different amounts of margin on the left than the right, and it definitely would just be a lot of tweaking to try to get all 3 pages, which are all written slightly differently, to be exactly the same. Probably more effort than it's worth. And meanwhile, while I was working on getting all of these pages to be under the same visual color theme, I didn't make any real progress on the next macro to open the news to speed up that process, nor have I done anything at all to schedule any new videos, nor have I recorded any footage, which there is definitely a danger here where I will just get bored and start making more footage and playing another game without actually scheduling any footage, which would be a mistake. Meanwhile, I did find time to watch plenty of things on Hulu during the downtime. I watched this anime called I'm Quitting Heroing. About 3 or 4 episodes into the 12-episode series, you start to realize, or I started to realize, how little animation is actually in the show. A lot of times it's just people sitting around talking to each other. And the whole series overall, I feel like probably would have worked way better as a manga versus an anime, because there's just very little action. There's kind of a forced excuse for a boss fight at the end, and then there's just kind of a wrap up at the end of the series. I don't want to spoil too much, but yeah, the premise in part may have been slightly interesting at the beginning, but it didn't really justify 12 episodes. It probably should have been 6 episodes long, the way it went. But yeah, that's talking about no-name animes that nobody's even really talking about on Hulu instead of talking about video game news. So let me get back on track. Astrobot director rules out VR versions. He says he wants to hear from fans about a PC port, which, yeah. Astrobot probably would work better trying to be an IP and trying to be on multiple consoles instead of trying to be a mascot for Sony. That seems like they don't want a mascot, although who knows if the new people in charge really want a mascot or not. And frankly, you could easily have Astrobot be the known mascot for PlayStation and still have a PC port. VR, though, is this constantly in stasis, dead technology that will just never be adopted until it becomes effectively free, which it'll be a long time until that happens. And even if VR was free, it just has so many other caveats to it that, yeah, it's just not going to really ever be fully adopted. It's always going to be a gimmick. Speaking of gimmicks, I saw Nintendo on YouTube talking more about the Nintendo Museum in Kyoto, Japan, and showing off some more footage as far as what effectively they're trying to do. Is the first floor of their museum is supposed to be these interactive displays, kind of like a amusement park in some small pathetic way, trying to emulate what Nintendo World by Universal Studios Japan has done, but it's not going to have any roller coasters or any real rides, and it's not going to be anywhere as big as Nintendo World in Japan is. But yeah, I think in a lot of ways it's probably hedging their bets and just trying to have interactive experiences on the first floor, and then the second floor is literally just going to be a very big museum with things behind glass cases from what it looks like it is now. So I could see you going to the Nintendo Museum, and they're doing a lottery for tickets anyways, but I could see somebody going there and being done with it in 3 or 4 hours, whereas the Nintendo World amusement park is definitely an all-day type activity, like most amusement parks are. I could also see, in general, it just being a much worse situation for non-Japanese speakers than Japanese speakers, and it could very much be that you're not very welcome as a tourist, or that there's a lot of people that barely speak English as far as the staff there. It is also worth pointing out, if we want to just everybody put on your tinfoil hat theory here, there is a strangeness to the fact that Nintendo has built this museum in what was their original factory in which they made Hanafuda cards, mostly for the Yakuza. We're talking decades and decades ago, where this is where Nintendo became very popular and successful, is that their Hanafuda cards were very much liked by the Yakuza running gambling rings. But in the world of Japan and building maintenance, the buildings aren't typically built very well. Even factory buildings are not built very well, and it is very common to just tear down something and build something completely new in the same spot. So there is this rumor that Jimmy Hoffa is buried in the concrete of one of the baseball stadiums in the United States. Tinfoil hat theory here. Maybe there's some incriminating evidence, maybe it's not a person per se, that is buried in the building of the museum, and that is why they're keeping that museum the way it is. Of course, it more realistically, less paranoid wise, it's probably a case they just feel like the building itself might be of historical significance. Kyoto, the city of Kyoto themselves may want to preserve the building for historical significance. But yeah, you would think in that same square footage that they could have torn it down and they could have built, instead of a 2-story building, a 4 or 5-story building very easily. They could have doubled that to an 11-story building, and then that would have given them a lot more room. Being a 2-story building right now, they're going to struggle even to grow as a museum from the beginning. Like, as soon as they have 2 more consoles, they're going to have to just start squeezing things smaller and smaller on that one floor of their museum to get everything to fit. But yeah, I would highly recommend everybody check out the Nintendo video. He highlights a lot more than what I saw originally. But there is actually very little to know, since it's all under construction at the moment. As far as the museum, Nintendo Museum is going to be, we'll know a lot more once it's open and somebody actually goes through it. The next story we have here is that the unionized staff at the Call of Duty studio Raven Software says that Activision is stalling over contract talks. Workers at the studio voted to unionize in 2022, so it's been 2 years effectively of negotiation, and this is very common where you will have companies come out and say that they are negotiating in good faith when they have no intention of really negotiating in good faith. They're just saying that to set the legal records, to make that claim, when the inevitable National Labor Relations Board claim has to be filed by a union for their stall tactic contract negotiation nonsense. And every day they can stall is another day that they can save a few pennies, because inherently a new union is not going to accept a contract where everything stays the same. They are going to want better working conditions, which is going to cost money. They're going to want better health care, more than likely, which is going to cost money. And they're going to want better pay very often, most of the time, which is going to cost money. So the best thing a company can do as far as their bottom line is concerned, as far as their money is concerned, is to simply negotiate in bad faith, hire somebody who's made a career of negotiating in bad faith until there is a complaint being filed. And in fairness, I've never really heard the National Labor Review Board being able to actually accomplish too much, because it usually just does end up in striking anyways. Perhaps there's a case where you have to file a National Labor Review Board, or it helps you to file a National Labor Review Board claim before you strike, but I've always seen it just go to striking. I've never seen the National Labor Review Board or National Relations Board accomplish too much. Sometimes I think they've fined some people, some companies, but that's it. But yeah, they're claiming unfair labor practice by refusal to bargain / bad faith bargaining. Bad faith bargaining meaning that you're just spouting out nonsense or agreeing to things, then not agreeing to things, unagreeing to things, acting in bad faith, not actually trying to get a resolution. I imagine we will see more instances like this fairly often as the game. One of the reasons why I imagine the picture here is so stretched is that this type of image more than likely has several different classes being applied to it, and so if it is being treated as an image but also being treated as a featured image, it might be getting stretched twice. But yeah, my grasp of CSS is not particularly the greatest, in fairness. Like, it's not something that really even existed to the level that it exists now when I was taught HTML, which has changed quite a bit. I was taught HTML probably closer to version 1 of HTML than version 5 of HTML, which is very different. Maybe I was technically taught version 3, but yeah, there was entirely different ways in which you would make a page look the way you wanted to look when I was taught HTML, which is definitely a statement as far as just how what you're learning in schools more than likely is going to be fairly outdated and useless, and it is better to learn how to learn new things than it is to learn the actual things in schools. You do need foundational things, and some things don't change too much unless people go crazy and change them. Like math really shouldn't change too much. But yeah, learning to learn, learning to have a desire to learn is way more valuable than learning or memorization and regurgitation, which is far too emphasized in schools, is particularly like history classes is a great example there. I'm not sure I took a single history class where anybody cared about teaching the why something happened. It was very much just this happened, memorize this date, memorize this name of this event, and then regurgitate it on a test. It definitely made history very cold and clinical and not very focused on the human aspect of history. And history is definitely taught from a human perspective. Moving on with the news stories, Castlevania Dominus Collection is going to bring all 3 DS Castlevania games to modern formats. It includes a reimagined version of Haunted Castle also, which I suspect is not a Castlevania game. So the question here is, which of these games is from Haunted Castle? So I think it was the Nintendo DS games in particular that were the least accessible games in the Castlevania series. But I'm not sure that as far as how the Castlevania story goes, if you really need to follow any story in Castlevania. It's more of the playback. So yeah, you can definitely see how this was probably the top screen and this was probably the bottom screen on the dual screen, and DS games in particular have been the most difficult ones to figure out a way to port. And you can definitely see how this is a series that is not particularly well suited to be on such a small resolution, small screen. Yeah. The scale has to be zoomed out quite a bit. I don't think the resolution on the Nintendo DS was particularly high. Yeah, if you were going to make a modern Nintendo DS or Game Boy in general, there's definitely an argument for potentially just having extremely high retina display style screens, something at a 2K, 4K, even 8K resolution, so you could squeeze all those as many pixels as possible. That you would have to go higher in resolution than even what you would have to do on a big TV screen. Yeah, it seems like you can move things around as far as the interfaces. And then touch controls is another aspect that you'd have to deal with. And it's being run in an emulator, obviously. So that'll potentially be an issue too, as far as just how well does the emulator really work. I'm wondering, in this new attempting to be more professional style of running the video game news streams, should I comment on Black Hunter 88's comment on YouTube that just says hi babe? I guess I can say hi. It doesn't affect me one bit if somebody wants to call me babe. It's probably spam if I was to guess, but I'm not a real person. But alright, I'll respond to hi if you want to call me babe. That would probably be the first time in my life anybody's said that to me, but whatever. I wanted to see more about the hidden thing. And see, weirdly, my plugin there did not work to block this, so this is exactly what I'm trying to avoid. Is I don't want just this random assortment of what YouTube thinks I should look at being thrown into my face, which, let's just be some real honest here, I would never want to see this. Would never want to see this. I don't know what this is. Looks like it's some kind of fight tournament footage. This and this are pretty much the exact same thing. Don't really want to see that. I really don't want to see any of this. So yeah, it looks like the Castlevania was the original arcade version of Castlevania called Haunted Castle. So I guess that might be like the first game in the whole series, or a reimagined version of the first game in the whole series. Yeah. From my perspective, being very much more of a Metroid fan, I've never really found time to play any of the Castlevania games, but I've never really seen any gameplay of Castlevania that made it feel like it was as good as even the first Metroid NES game was. There's just a lot more streamlinedness, I think, to the first Metroid game versus the earliest Castlevania games I've seen footage of, where the earliest Castlevania games seem to be just more complicated and less interesting. Yeah, Castlevania may very well have come first, but in my mind, I kind of feel like Metroid clones should be called Metroid clones instead of Metroidvanias. Although, if we were going to follow the logic that all genres of games that are clones of major games should have at least two games in their name, Metroidvania makes an interesting argument, but then we would probably call 3D or 2D side-scrolling platformers like Mario Onyx mixing Sonic and Mario, or Sonico's games, or something like that. And that never really caught on, and that would not happen these days. Moving on with the news, Bandai Namco is ending the anime MMORPG Blue Protocol in Japan and canceling the Western release. It will not be possible to provide a service that satisfies all of you, is the subheadline here. I went through a lot of work to make sure all the subheadlines and everything here were white text with a black shadow on the blue background. From what I saw on Reddit, the in-game loop was not very well received for Blue Protocol. Now, this is yet another Amazon Games failure at a certain point to also point out. But yeah, while I do recognize Blue Protocol, there's actually a lot of animes with blue in the name, so it's not that crazy that maybe I'm thinking of something else with blue in the name. Looking at the screenshot though, this does feel like this is just a standard fantasy game with standard 2D animated anime kawaii style characters. It's definitely not catching my attention by that thumbnail. Here we can look at a trailer for a failed game, and yeah, if I was to guess, this was very much a reaction to something like Genshin Impact, where Bandai Namco wanted to have their own Genshin Impact game. Although if I was to look at the list of Bandai Namco licensed video games, there's probably already something else that already existed. It's probably just not an MMORPG, and the MMORPG element these days may be a major problem too. In a funny way, this may be Bandai Namco's attempt at making something like Destiny. But yeah, almost all MMORPGs have failed. You have EverQuest, you have Elder Scrolls Online, you have Warcraft, World of Warcraft, and that's about the 3 successful in the long run games that I can even name. There is very possibly also a case where Bandai Namco wanted Blue Protocol and a Blue Protocol anime series to become super popular, particularly amongst the Japanese fans of anime, which are very flippant and don't stick with much of anything in the long run. And so maybe they're pulling up and giving up because the anime series wasn't popular. But it also can be very much a case that Bandai Namco may just be fairly flippant in general. Their Dragon Ball, I think it's Bandai Namco that does the Dragon Ball games, are not very well supported or maintained for very long. Which it certainly would make a lot of sense to try to have one Dragon Ball Z MMORPG that you would just throw a ton of money on behind to try and make it succeed. But even that doesn't make a lot of sense. I think they may have tried to do that with One Piece also. The Borderlands movie is getting a digital release just 3 weeks after its cinema release. Which, I mean, financially, that's probably the right move. There's as much buzz as this movie is ever going to get. It's all negative, but there is a possibility if you put it on digital stores quickly, you might get a few content creators to hate watch Borderlands. Even though there is a major movement now amongst content creators to tell other content creators to not hate watch shows. And then eventually, probably pretty quickly, you'll start to see it move away from digital stores in that you would have to rent it or buy it, into just being on streaming services or being on extended cable. I wouldn't be surprised if Borderlands becomes extremely cheap to get the license to the point where you start to see it airing on extended cable fairly consistently, or even over the air broadcast extremely often. There is definitely on over the air TV, if you can get a decent amount of over the air television channels. There are shows that are public domain, movies that are public domain, like Night of the Living Dead, and entire over the air channels will just air that on an almost weekly basis because it's absolutely free, and so it doesn't cost them money, and they don't care what's on their channel. They just care about not going silent and being fined by the FCC, and having somewhere that they can put ads. And the ads that the over-the-air channels are often airing are ads that are like as seen on TV style projects, called now the buy style of commercial ads, which the TV channels get kickbacks, for lack of a better term. They get a commission for every item that is sold through those ads. But yeah, and there is a small possibility, probably not a very large one, that if Borderlands just aired over and over again, it might just wear people down to the point where they have some kind of love to hate it feeling to it. It's a Wonderful Life is kind of an example of that, where that movie, I believe, I could be totally wrong about this, but I believe It's a Wonderful Life was a failure theatrically, major failure, and was very cheap, and as such, it got aired on Christmas on TV every year and just became this Christmas tradition. I don't think it's actually particularly even that good of a movie, but it's hard to tell with old movies to really compare them to modern movies. Yeah, Ben-Hur, I believe, was not a theatrical success, but it was so expensive to make that it gained, I think, a lot of success by being aired fairly commonly on TV. And yeah, there definitely are just some shows that start to become feeling, at least they used to feel like traditions, because there was just nothing else on. The Puppy Bowl, counter programming against the Super Bowl, is probably a great example of something that would not work unless it was the only other thing on when the Super Bowl was airing. Noticeably, there is no Puppy Bowls otherwise throughout the year. Of course, all of that inherently lives in a world where there was only a small handful of channels on extended cable and basic cable. Now with streaming services, you can watch so much stuff. It is a much higher chance that the Borderlands movie will become almost forgotten media, in that it will be potentially locked behind some obscure streaming service, or it'll just not be easily found anywhere. What my theory was before is that perhaps the film Borderlands would be so cheap that it might air at like midnight showings and potentially try to be something like a Rocky Horror Picture Show, where people would yell at the screen and make fun of it and bring in Nerf guns and cosplay as they go to the midnight showing. Which, while all of that could happen, I haven't really heard anything indicating that Borderlands has even bad enough lines or bad enough content to make fun of to do something like that. or good enough content. It needs to either be slightly on the scale of being better, slightly better, or slightly worse, and it's just in that mushy middle. The Rocky Horror Picture Show, in contrast, is actually watchable by yourself in a room, whereas the Borderlands movie seems to not be watchable. So Rocky Horror Picture Show tends to be slightly on the better side of content. Not great content by any means, but good enough that you could still have a fun time. Legitimately have a fun time, not just have a fun time making fun of it. Whereas watching The Room, which would have been what most theater moviegoers would have said was probably the worst movie ever. Noticeably, there's never been any midnight showings that have popped up around The Room either, watching the absolute terrible movie. Yeah. The price here is laughable. $25 to purchase, $20 to rent. Prime Video, Apple TV, and Google Play. It's laughably expensive. Yeah, that probably speaks to a major issue too, in that if I was paying even $15 for a 4K UHD physical disc, it would have to be a particularly good movie. I am personally targeting about $10 to get a 4K UHD disc, which almost all of them come with free Blu-ray discs also, and often they're just repackaging the Blu-ray discs that didn't sell before. Like Slick Deals had all of the Harry Potter movies on 4K UHDs and Blu-rays, and when they say plus Blu-rays, I'm assuming that means they are actually Blu-ray discs and not just the first couple layers of the 4K UHD is the Blu-ray version, and then the extra deeper layers are the 4K UHD version. I wish they had invented the concept of layers as a much smarter system originally, even with like DVDs, in such a way that you could have one disc that would play in a DVD player, and then it would just get the first few bits of data, and then as you went up to Blu-ray, it would get deeper layers that would get more bits of data, and we get even more layers with 4K UHD. Then you could just continuously add layers as lasers got bigger. Well, the laser wavelengths got smaller and could see through several layers of information. But yeah, and even now, me buying a few 4K Blu-ray, 4K UHD discs, bit rot is still somewhat of a concern. Like, I have a whole shelf full of DVDs mostly, and it's possible all of them are bit rotted. Probably not, but it is possible that it is just a museum of, hey, there used to be playable data on these DVDs, but now they actually wouldn't play. Yep. One of the complaints about the Harry Potter 8 movie 4K UHD is that they are packaged poorly and that the discs come loose and scratch, and that is very much a problem too, as the packaging has gotten cheaper and worse around DVDs, and they've always been terrible as far as the way they are packaged. $2.99 would probably be about the price I would want to pay to rent Borderlands, and to own it $5.99, and that would be on Blu-ray at $5.99. They need to know what they have there. Inherently, maybe you could bundle it and give a free copy Steam code for Borderlands 1 by buying the movie, but Borderlands 1 is often on sale for like $10, so you still would have to charge $10 for it. Moving on with the news, 2 Wii games from the My Sims series are getting re-released on the Switch. So My Sims Cozy Bundle, My Sims and My Sims Kingdom. The emulator CMU2, which I assume is the version 2 of CMU, has shifted its focus shifted its focus is the wrong word. It has announced that it's going to have snap packs and flat pack support for Linux, which flat packs are definitely what the Steam Deck uses. And it is also worth mentioning that the Dolphin emulator, which had flat packs being made, the flat pack was a community project, which has now transitioned over to being an official project. So the official makers of Dolphin are now running a flat pack. So yeah, the numbers seem to be going up and up as far as the number of games available on the Steam Deck. There are now over 16,000 games that should play with minimal glitching on the Steam Deck. And flat packs do seem like they are going to be the one of the formats that is going to be focused on more and more. Official flat packs in particular, considering how FlatHub is moving towards hiding non-official flat packs without you changing the setting. I suppose this is connected to the Sims series, and in my mind this is yet another example of just where I don't understand what the Sims is supposed to be. In this case, these Wii games probably could not look the way regular Sims games looked, with just the weakness of the Wii in its video card settings capabilities. Or maybe they were trying to make things that looked like they would match the Mii's, although this doesn't inherently look like a Mii. But yeah, I would think that Sims should be a very popular series, perhaps targeted more towards the female persuasion, but it just recently has never felt like it makes any real sense. The only time I think The Sims kind of made some sense to me is when you're talking like the original Sims game and you're doing these simulations of building a house, decorating a house, and torturing people by making them live in a house with no bathroom. Or yeah, very quickly when the description of most people's gameplay of The Sims involves either installing a nude mod so you can see them naked in the shower for whatever little pixel you might see from that, or trapping them in the bathroom until they die, or trapping them in the swimming pool until they die. Like, once almost every description of someone's gameplay is how they lost interest in actually playing the game the way the creators intended, and instead was just doing something sadistic, then that kind of highlights the problem with The Sims. I really haven't seen anybody ever talk about playing The Sims legitimately, or doing well in The Sims, or beating The Sims. I don't think there really is a way to beat it. Which inherently, if I was in charge of The Sims right now, I might say, you know what? If this game is just a sadism simulator, let's just embrace that. Let's just make Second Life. Let's just have simulistic dungeon keeper style gameplay where you are just capturing and torturing people, and let's see how far we can go before we get too far with it. And yeah, definitely I found Dungeon Keeper way more interesting. On top of which, Dungeon Keeper has an actual gameplay loop that's fun and an actual story, which The Sims really doesn't have any of that. The Epic Mickey Rebrushed demo is now available. Which I guess there's not too much to really say there. Let me make sure. Yep. I don't know how I screwed this up this much. That tweets are all far to the left and pictures are stretched too much to the right. Yeah. There is also an argument certainly to maybe change the black background on white text for the tweets, but keeping it also works fairly well. Capcom Fighting Collection 2 features 8 games, including Capcom vs. SNK and Power Stone 1 and 2. I know that there's a strong fandom of Power Stone fans out there, so that'll probably work. Digital Eclipse is releasing a Tetris collection called Tetris Forever. This compilation is the 3rd game in the Gold Master series. Weirdly though, I don't think that this is going to include Tetris Infinite in the Nintendo Switch game, or Tetris 99 or whatever it was called, which was one that people really liked. They're making an accurate recreation of the original version on the Electronica 60 computer, which is not one I even recognize. Then the 1988 Famicom /NES version, and then several games that I don't think anybody is going to really recognize. And this is an interesting point certainly to ask, as far as how interesting can you even make a trailer for Tetris when it's just going to be different versions of Tetris being shown. Lots of different versions existed, and yeah, fairly quickly it starts to look different, unrecognizable. Which game is this, though? And see, this is for the Switch, so you're still not really getting a massive MMO of people playing Tetris against each other. On PC, which is what people really would like. It's for Tetris 99 to have come over to Steam. And at a certain level, I'm not sure that Tetris is really that copyrightable, so you probably could make a PC Tetris 99 if you wanted to. Just don't call it Tetris. But I'm not sure that really would work too well. Yeah, I don't know. I hope I was actually showing something there. Man, I need to adjust when coming over here does that versus when it doesn't, because I sometimes do just get a little bit too far past the left side of the screen. There needs to be more of a buffer. Moving on with the news, I need to hurry up. Power Wash Simulator is getting Shrek DLC, which, okay. Power Wash Simulator is a game that has some surprising staying power and success. The main gameplay loop makes sense to me why it's successful, but the staying power is getting kind of silly as far as people still wanting to play it. Bolero is getting The Witcher, Vampire Survivors, Among Us, and Dave the Diver decks, so a lot of cross promotion there. Not really hearing anybody really talk about Bolero anymore. It very possibly is one of those games that was more of a video game journalist darling style game over people actually playing it inherently the problem with mainstream video game journalists, or just video game journalists in general, is that they're constantly getting new games, they're constantly moving on, and there's just more of a buffer, I think, for your average gamer to say that they need to hear about a game from people and hear that people are still playing that game several weeks later before they'd even consider buying it and playing it, or they need to be super hyped about the game and buy it and pre-order it before it releases. And very often actual gamers don't stick with games that long, so that's an issue certainly too. Let's see. A new live stream of Metaphor ReFantagio takes place this week, according to Video Games Chronicles. PlayStation State of Play broadcast could happen next month, it's been claimed. PlayStation is raising the price, I believe, again for the PlayStation in Japan, so weirdly it's nearly selling out and causing scalping in China because of Black Myth Wukong, which notice nobody's really talking about that game now. It very much was a flash in the pan, but yeah, if anything, it might have made sense for them to raise the price in China so to prevent scalping, but that really wouldn't have prevented scalping in anyways. Meanwhile, the one place where the Switch is trouncing PlayStation is Japan. Well, that's not the one place, that's pretty much everywhere. The Switch is trouncing the PS5. So it just doesn't make a lot of sense for them to raise the price unless they are just admitting that they are going to be in a distant second to the Nintendo Switch, and as such they are just trying to raise the price. But then they also are not setting themselves up for a good competition against the Switch 2 when that happens. So a raised price of a PS5 or a new version of the PS5 or PS5 Pro being announced in Japan may sell even worse once the Switch 2 happens, and maybe that's their plan, is just to blame the Switch 2 for low sales number. It may also be a case that the PS5 Pro, if a PS5 Pro ever gets released, is just struggling to maintain stock, so raising the price is the only way they can maintain that infinite growth of their financials that every company wants. Lego Horizon Adventures release date briefly appeared online. So November 14th is theoretically here. This is weird, though. That's another page I need to take a look at and see why that's purple. Here we again. Here's the story I was just talking about. PS5 gets another steep price increase in Japan. Both the standard and digital modules are going up by around $90. That is a lot of money to increase the price. That is a crazy flippant price change. Which the only reason you'd possibly do something like that is just so you could claim it's on sale during Christmas, but really just have it at the same price. But yeah, that's just bad bossing, in my opinion. Bad finances. And so me talking about that story and then it popping up is 100% a coincidence. Maybe if I had a fourth monitor, it might make some sense to have news stories pop up in front of me before I'm about to talk to them, but that's not really how teleprompter software works. You're supposed to have things pop up as you're talking about them, not before. I know other podcasters and such sometimes have a list of topics, and so they can go up and down the list and they can talk about things when they feel more passionate about talking about those things, and they can skip over things. That's not really how I'm running this live stream / I guess it's technically a podcast. It's not much of one if you're going to describe it as that. And yeah, having a list of topics only really makes sense if multiple people were talking and discussing a subject. Me just going through all the headlines, knowing I want to go through all of the headlines, it doesn't make a lot of sense to jump ahead or jump around. Nintendo has confirmed back-to-back indie showcase and partner directs. Tuesday is when that's going to happen, August 27th. Well, I guess that's already happened. Then, Sonic 3 movie social media account teases Keanu Reeves as the voice of Shadow. So some of these are slightly older stories. Again, I'm not sure why this is a tweet, but I'm not sure why it's purple in that color. To get rid of the underline for hyperlinks, there's a newer CSS thing called line decoration or something like that. And that's a whole property I haven't even heard of until I started to research it. But yeah, you can set line decoration to none, and then links will not have a line under them. It's kind of surprising you can do that, because that does allow people to hide links. But for my uniquely weird purpose, getting rid of the underlines on links makes sense. You probably could mandatorily force your own themes on a lot of pages. And then our last story that we have from Video Games Chronicle says Crash Bandicoot 5 was cancelled in favor of live game services. It's being claimed. That's going to bring me to the Gamatsu headline stories. We've got some games that look interesting here. This is funny because I would have thought this would have been a THQ property, but it's being published by the Mix Games. Rugrats Adventures in Gameland almost certainly was a Game Boy game that's getting re-released on Steam, which there is definitely a possibility here that more Game Boy games or Game Boy Color games could be released on PC. It's actually fairly easy to port those to Steam. It's the dual screen ones that are going to take more work. Of course, a large amount of the games for Game Boy are very short and not very good, but better that they would be on Steam for historical purposes than not. A game called Claire Obscure Expedition 33 has its first look gameplay. We are now at Gamatsu. You would definitely be forgiven for thinking we're still looking at Video Games Chronicle now, as far as I have adjusted things. And yeah, again, everything's a little bit different here. This time it's less stretched on the picture and there's just more of a buffer here. Ideally, I'd like that to be the case always. That way, when I first get to the top of a page, it looks like it's its own separate thing. And inherently, I don't really need to scroll down and show anything else unless I want to. But yes, this is now how Gamatsu looks with my tweaks, comparing that to what it would have looked like originally. Notice there's more space here, so I've added something probably not necessary as far as the visual theming. But yeah, and you can see the picture here is smaller and more stretched out to make sure it fits in the height of the window. But yeah, it was a little bit less work than I thought it would be to get Gamatsu pages to look the way I wanted to, or at least start to look the way I would want them to. I would assume this Star Rupture game has a announcement release date, but I guess it's already on the following list. So I assume I've already made a YouTube short on it, so I'm going to say no to that. The Famitsu review score for issue 1863 is out, with several games, more games than you normally see being reviewed. Dustborn getting 32 out of 40. Imio the Smiling Man getting 31 out of 40. I'm actually surprised it's that high. A Natsuno Kanata Beyond the Summer getting 32 out of 40. Toro Odai Awakening the Spring 33 out of 40. Toho Denmaku Kagura Fantasia Lost getting 28 out of 40, particularly low. And then Witchspring R getting 31 out of 40. All very Japanese centric and themed games. Yeah, I'm actually very surprised Imio is even 31 out of 40, because I definitely felt like that was more of a low effort work by Nintendo to just maintain a trademark or copyright than an actual effort to make anything good. Yeah. Gigabash Mighty DLC Characters Rojak Balzar launches September 5th. Here's something I could still change as far as the red here. You might want to change that to white. And here's something that I did not work on as far as getting these screenshot galleries to fit exactly the way it should. It is very much a move fast and break it mentality that I am working on as far as making these tweaks. Dragon Quest Monsters, The Dark Prince is, I guess, now on Steam. What's funny is these YouTube shorts are not connecting to the Gamatsu articles in any way. So yeah, I just don't know. And see, this one's mixed, which is a shame because I kind of wanted that to succeed, but nope. So I almost wonder if this is Flawless Cleanup articles, that the Flawless Cleanup actually succeeded and opened a bunch of links. If that was the case, why are we looking at Yakuza Kiwami? Not Kawaii. Because that one's already on my wish list and not even on the follow list. So yeah, a fast-paced turn-based tactics game Warside campaign trailer is available. This looks very much in the similar art style as a Nintendo Switch game. Yeah, and see, we're way to this point where the Rugrats Adventures in Game Land launches on September 10th. So this article opened a Steam link like 20-30 tabs to the right of it. And I don't know why. No clue why that would be the case. One assumes that this is not a brand new game, but maybe it is. I mean, it might very well just be a brand new game. A retro-inspired platform has been dated. Yeah, it's brand new. It's not some Game Boy Color re-release. It looks like a Game Boy Color re-release. Although, inherently, if you are going to make a 3D platformer, it does kind of make some sense to get a license and put that license on it. I thought I had installed a anti-duplicate tab extension too, but it doesn't seem like it's working at the moment. Maybe that's what messed things up, is that I enabled that extension and it's not working the way it should. Croc Legends of the Gobos remaster has been announced for consoles and PC alongside an Argonaut Games revival. Declare Obscure Expedition 33. These screenshots are much more interesting than what I've seen so far. I may very well have to just end this stream up quickly. I'm going too slow, and I do have kind of a hard out in about 30 minutes. Star Rupture gameplay reveal trailer and screenshots. Here we have Star Rupture. And then Star Rupture again. RGG Summit 2024 is set for September 20th. That is Ryugai Gotoku Studio. Blue Protocol ending service. Dragon Quest Monsters. The Dark Prince is coming to PC, iOS, and Android on September 11th. It's kind of a bad day to release any game, but I guess the Japanese probably don't really care or know. Yes, duplicate tabs, that was making for a real issue. Despelote or Despelote adds a PS4 and is deleted. PS4 version and is delayed to early 2025. Noir Play With Your Food is coming to the Switch on August 29th, so now I'm understanding why I saw this tab. But yeah, it just, the old macro really is just clicking on everything twice. Lodal Not coming to the Switch on September 9th alongside a godless mode. Doesn't really seem like a game that would have a god in it in the first place. Yakuza Kiwami is coming to the Switch on October 24th, which explains why we saw that article. And see, the weird thing about like YouTube Shorts is there probably is value in making the exact same YouTube short a second time than there is trying to hope that anybody would be promoted a YouTube short from even a week ago from you. That they're, as far as I would guess, completely disposable and thrown away from the suggestion algorithm after probably a week at most. 48 hours, 24 hours possibly. Rune Factory Gardens of Azuma launches in spring of 2025 for the Switch and PC. Rune Factory is a weird name for the game it shows. Then fast-paced turn-based tactics game award size, campaign trailers available. And then we're going yet again for a third time. I just don't get it why it's going around 3 times like this. Unless there's some just fragment of what version 2.0 of this macro that is running in version 1.0 for some reason. Yeah, this just does not make sense that it would have gone through the Gematsu headlines in 3 different times. There is problems with my code in version 2.0 as it currently stands, in that it can't really do loops like you normally would do it because it's trying to parallelize things. It has to remember where it is and at some point and then go around in circles. And the way it's going to go around in circles is it's going to open up Steam games and then go open up a Video Games Chronicle article, then open up another Steam game, then open up a Gematsu article, then open up another Steam game, and then open up a game developer article. And it's just going to keep going around in circles like that, opening as many pages as possible from as many different websites and servers as possible, which is the best way to optimize your bandwidth, but it is also the most complicated way to do anything, and only worthwhile in the fact that loading up Steam pages takes a while, and all the savings and time that I actually get may not really amount to much because it's not like I'm really going to do anything with those savings and time. They may give me an extra 20 minutes every stream every day or so. Barely enough to make a very short episode on a short episode style series. So that brings us now to GameDeveloper.com, and once again you'd be forgiven for thinking this is the exact same page. That's the whole point here, and eventually I'll probably train myself to stop mentioning where these news stories even come from, just as an effect to save time. But yeah, maybe slightly different tweaks. I'm trying to use the same settings and the same code over and over again, so everything tries to look the same, but this is what I'm looking for is a headline and a subheadline. Sometimes the headline is going to take 2, maybe even 3 lines, and then a picture that completely fits with a buffer so you're not seeing like the first sentence here. And so we're mostly getting that to work. Inherently, the way HTML works is, I think, silly, and they should probably rethink it anyways, so just everything would always fit regardless of the resolution on the screen. It probably gave too much power to the developers. I can say the margin here seems to still be a little off. Like, it is not going to the very edge, but this margin here, like this word of should probably have wrapped, and this word gate very possibly should have wrapped, but environmental here, I wouldn't want to see that wrap. And that's kind of it. Yeah, there's nothing else to really show here. Compare that to what GameDeveloper.com would look like otherwise, with white text and black background. Yep. In this case, the word wrap is wrapped better, so my settings as far as adding a margin is probably a mistake, but my settings also are changing things slightly, stretching things out to be wider, take up more of the screen, where there's huge amounts of empty space here and here on the side, all of which would have been taken up by other ads and sidebars and things like that. Do we even talk about this? I really don't have much to say. Blockchain studio Double Jump Tokyo, and that's 10 million from SBI Investment, Sony, and others. So it's more investments in blockchain. Monument Valley 3 is heading to Netflix Games to avoid an App Store compromise. I don't know what that means, really. But more than likely, I would assume that Netflix just paid the money, and this is the way they're spending that. Blue Protocol was being shut down, and they've terminated their publishing deal with Amazon Games, obviously. Microsoft and Activision Blizzard are accused of bad faith bargaining by Raven's software union workers. We already talked about this. This is probably a great example of the right kind of screenshot to use for that headline, in that it's just highlighting Raven software in particular and not just showing the front desk of Activision Blizzard, which was the headline, the screenshot that Video Games Chronicle used. Yeah. PTW has acquired Ghost Punch Games for $13 million and then immediately pitched AI-based services, which does not spell good news for Ghost Punch Games. Being acquired is almost never good news anyways, but it may be the end of some bad news in the short term. AI-based services definitely shows where the new company, the new owner, is focused and thinking, and it definitely isn't thinking around the lines of making good games. There is a report that a lawsuit has raised concerns over Xola's CEO's use of the company money. Former executives claim that Xola CEO has spent years putting millions of the company's accounts into his own and firing anyone who voiced concerns. Let's see. And then this article is amended to more accurately communicate the allegations presented in the Bloomberg's original report. Now, the question I have to remind myself and ask is, who's Xola? I don't know. But, yeah. As financial times get tougher, people who have been running scams tend to get caught more and more as the bubbles burst. So I would expect to see that there is more stories like this on the horizon. And reports and accusations really don't mean much of anything anyway, so until actual files and charges have been filed, it's barely even newsworthy. Spiders developers, I don't even recognize a game named Spiders, isn't the company named Spiders, are going to strike after alleging mismanagement and growing instability. Studio workers claim management refused calls to improve the toxic workplace culture and has resulted in burnout and retention issues. Now, that's kind of a great example of work conditions that you would strike over instead of just pay that you would strike over. And it is, particularly in the game industry, an issue that needs to be addressed and dealt with a lot more, as far as just toxic workplaces, toxic management, poor increased burnout, retention issues. It really doesn't help morale in the company when you see your co-workers irate or getting laid off or quitting. That doesn't feel like a healthy, safe, financially safe environment when it feels like everything is falling apart around you. And very often you don't see strikes just coming from that, but it is often the second thing that is negotiated for or tried to improve. And inherently, most places that have to form a union have some level of toxic workplace culture anyways. So yeah, you don't tend to form unions if you're super happy with your workplace culture, or all the other parts of your job, or most of the other parts of your job. I was thinking about how crazy it really sounds from the abstract for so many people to say, oh, I'm tired from working 8, 10, 12 hours a day, and then somehow equating that to a sense of satisfaction that they are been physically exhausted or probably exploited. But yeah, that is one of the dogmatic religious thoughts that are preached to the working class and under capitalism, is that you feel more like a productive member of society, someone who's contributing to society, the more physically or mentally exhausted you are, when really it doesn't have to be that way. Like, you could definitely work a job, accomplish quite a lot, be invigorated by that job, work at a reasonable pace, and not be physically exhausted. But certainly in all forms of media in the United States and around the world, there is the stereotype of typically the father being very tired coming home, working very hard to provide for his family, and being exalted because he's physically tired and working way harder than he probably should. Well, with that thought, I am almost out of time, so let's just go through the GameDeveloper.com stories, and we're going to have to skip the games that came out on Steam. I will highlight what I curate for on Friday. Foam Stars here has made a pivot to free-to-play in October. It should have done that from day one. Studio Amugi is ditching oatmeal narrative design with Bonaparte a mechanized revolution. I have no idea what that even really means, but I'll say check out GameDeveloper.com if you're interested in that. A16Z Games is offering a 750,000 investments and mentorships through a speedrun accelerator. Sony is raising the price of the PS5 hardware in Japan. We already talked about that. Take a look at Nick's motion capture puppet for Star Wars Outlaws. Guess check out that video if you're interested. It's basically an advertisement. Xsolla and Savvy Games are set to launch Development Academy in Saudi Arabia. Well, that becomes a very different headline with accusations of people stealing money in Xsolla, the CEO stealing money. Yeah. There is a report that Activision mismanaged Toys for Bob after a modest Crash Bandicoot 4 sales. And Valve's new announced Deadlock hits a peak of 90,000 players. Alright. So let me just quickly go to the other side and see if there's any other headlines we missed. These headlines are just still all over the place as far as where they're ending up. They shouldn't be jumping all over the place, but they are. The hope, although I'm very possibly won't accomplish it, is to have version 2.0 of my macro that opens all these tabs going and working as far as by Friday. But yeah, probably not gonna happen. Anyways, that's gonna be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Thanks.